morning. So, now if my slide will forward, there we go. Great, so just going to do a quick overview of what the structure is for our time together today. The webinar should last approximately 1 hour, and the slides and the recording, as we mentioned, will be made available in the next couple of days. If you have any technical difficulties, please pop something into the chat and we'll see if we can help you through that. And also we may be referring to the guidelines. We will be, sorry, you're going to be referring to the program guidelines and the pre-proposal application at various times. So it'd be really great for you to have these documents handy if you don't already. And I'm going to just pop that into the chat. Well, I was going to. So anyway, I'll pop that in a second. So it'd be great, you know, on the website, we have all our guidelines on there, and then it's broken out into different sections. So you can either open the entire, the whole packet, or you can just do parts of it. So let me just put that here real quick. So you have that. It's just good to have it to refer to as we're going through, because we'll be going through sort of section by section. So, and then with that, I think I'll move on. If I can, come outside, there we go. So pretty much what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be doing an overview of the SALC program, and then we're going to talk about the pre-proposal and application timeline and process, the eligibility criteria and steps to completing the pre-proposal. We're going to touch briefly on the priority populations option and how your project may be eligible for 100% funding. The next steps, we'll also discuss the next steps to completing your application after the pre-proposal, and then we'll open things up for questions. So before we get started with the presentation, we'd like to do a very quick survey, which I'm now really realizing I don't have the link to right in front of me, but I will get it. We do want to do just a quick poll just to get a sense of how many folks will be applying for the acquisition grants, and then how many you're thinking you're going to be applying for, submitting, how many projects. I'm going to make sure that, there we go. So this is it's just a super quick poll, and it won't be a poll that we're going to be, we won't be sharing this publicly. It's just really for us to get a sense in terms of helping us with our planning. So it's just 3 quick little questions. One is, how many projects, pre-proposals, do you plan on submitting? And again, approximately, we're not going to hold you to it. We're just trying to get a general sense. And then, will any of these pre-proposals be for a fee title project? And if so, how many? And then just if you'd pop your organization name in there, just so we can, make sure we're not double counting, because there may be 2 of you that are on the call and you're both responding. So we would really appreciate that. And is everyone able to open that link? Is that working? Can someone confirm that for me? Yes.
I don't think you put it in the chat.
Oh, I didn't? Okay, well, that's good info. Oh, okay, there we go. Thanks, Artemis, appreciate that. Funny having a complete silence. Okay, great. Can someone click and confirm that that's working okay? Yep, okay, good. Good. And feel free to do that, as you have time during the session, but it'd be really great to get that information. Like I said, it's really helpful for our team, so we kind of have a sense of what's happening. Great. All right, so with that, I'll move on to some of the basic components of the SALC program. The Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, as many of you know, is a component of the California Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. The Department of Conservation, in conjunction with the Natural Resources Agency, administers SALC on behalf of the council. The principal goals of SALC are to protect agricultural lands that support infill and compact development, that contribute to carbon neutrality and building climate resilience, including through supporting sustainable land management practices, to support coordinated land use planning and to support Executive Order N8220 by safeguarding the state's economic sustainability and food security, protecting biodiversity, enabling enduring conservation measures on working lands in partnership with land managers and natural resource user groups, and advancing equity and opportunity for all regions of California. The SALC program will award an amount equal to, gets a little confusing because it's a percentage of a percentage. It's an amount equal to 10% of the auction proceeds available from the 20% continuously appropriated to the California Strategic Growth Council for the AHSC program from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. In round 7, SGC awarded $65 million in funding for 19 easement projects and 3 planning projects. The actual funding level for fiscal year 21-22 will not be determined until after the 4th auction, which ends this month. So you can visit the Cap and Trade website if you're interested in seeing what the first 3 auction proceeds look like to get a sense of just how much funding might be available in this round. And I do have a link for that. Let me just get that for you. If you're interested in finding out, it also has information about the dates of that auction and so forth. There you go. I did hit send that time, didn't I? Yep, looks like I did. Great. So there's 3 components to the SALC program. All are focused on agricultural conservation. First, there's the acquisition grants, which is what we're talking about here today at this workshop. And those are focused on provide grants to permanently protect croplands, rangelands, and lands utilized for the cultivation of traditional resources from conversion to non-agricultural uses through the acquisition of voluntary permanent agricultural conservation easements or fee title purchases. And then land use planning grants that are focused on supporting the development of local and regional land use policies and economic development strategies to protect critical agricultural land. And then new this round, as many of you may know, we are also providing grants for capacity and project development. And these are focused on expanding organizational capacity to develop agricultural conservation acquisition projects. Some of you are probably familiar with the Prop 68 capacity land trust capacity grants that were provided a few years ago that were just wrapped up this year. And we got tremendous positive feedback on those. So now SALC is making those available. And as I mentioned, we'll be discussing the acquisition component of today's program. If you're interested in applying for land use planning or capacity grant funding, you can attend one of the upcoming workshops. The land use planning grant workshop will be held Tuesday, May 24th from 1:30 to 2:30. And the capacity grant application workshop will be on Tuesday, June 7th, 11 a.m. to noon. We have information about those on our website at this point. It's on the registration information and so forth is on the website. So if you're interested, you can pop over there after the workshop, of course. So to just kind of jump in now then about the acquisition grant. The agricultural conservation acquisition grants fund the following. They fund the purchase of conservation easements, so awards will cover up to 75% of the agricultural conservation value of the agricultural conservation easement, or the purchase of fee title. Awards will be given to not more than 25% of the total available funding. So, again, if it was something like 65 million, it would be a maximum of 25% of that. Awards will cover up to 75% of the agricultural conservation easement value of the properties, fair market value, similar to the, same as the others. And fee title projects will be held to the same eligibility criteria and scored by the same selection criteria as that which we're using for the easement projects. So who can apply for an agricultural conservation easement? Eligible applicants for these grants include cities, counties, nonprofit organizations, resource conservation districts, California Park or Open Space District or authorities, federally recognized and non-federally recognized California Native American tribes on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission. And then just as a note, the nonprofit applicants must have the conservation of agriculture, rangeland, or farmland in their stated purposes or adopted policies. So here is just a few basic points to keep in mind about these acquisition grants. Projects need to fund the conservation of cropland, rangeland, or land use used by tribes for gathering activities that promote healthy trees, shrubs, and perennial forbs for the cultivation of traditional foods, herbal medicine, fibers, and dyes. Restrictions to the property are in perpetuity. And we do not have a minimum parcel size. That question comes up a lot. There's no minimum parcel size. And projects cannot prohibit secondary dwellings or farm worker housing. And no permanent severance of water rights is allowed. So to receive funding from SALC for acquisition or fee projects, the applicant must agree to all of the conditions of funding listed on pages 34 to 36 of the guidelines. And that is, they have to agree to that for the entirety of the grant term. A couple examples of these include that there's clear title to the easement, and the easement can be conveyed at close of escrow. Easement appraisal must comply with the department's requirements, and on the website we have a document that shows DGS's, the Department of General Services, requirements. Total purchase price of the proposed easement cannot exceed the appraised fair market value of the easement. The applicant and seller of the easement agree to restrict the use of land in perpetuity. So these are just a few, as I mentioned, and while applicants are not required to complete a certificate of certification of conditions of funding as part of their pre-proposal or application, by entering into a grant agreement, if awarded, and entering into a grant agreement, it will constitute acceptance of the conditions of funding. So it's really important to make sure that you've reviewed this section in the guidelines and that the landowners are also aware of these conditions. So, and it's Appendix G of the guidelines, and you want to just to make sure that you are comfortable with all those conditions prior to applying. So this next slide shows an overview of the pre-proposal, application, and grant award timeline. Again, this is for acquisitions only. Note that for capacity and planning, that they have different timelines, which will be discussed in those workshops. So June 15th, the pre-proposals are due. And as you are probably aware, but just to remind you, pre-proposals are required. So for the acquisition component of the SALC program, a pre-proposal is required. No applications would be accepted directly. You need to do a pre-proposal, and then from there we do a review and we provide feedback, and you can apply after you've been given that feedback. So mid to late July, we'll be informing you of eligibility based on the pre-proposals, the review of the pre-proposals. September 9th will be when the applications for the eligible projects are due. We're anticipating awards to be recommended for approval by SGC in mid-December. And then generally speaking, we usually are looking to enter in the grantees to enter into grant agreement by March of 2023. Hard to imagine 2023. So that's kind of the general timing of everything. And now here's a quick snapshot of the review process for the SALC acquisition pre-proposals and the applications. So for pre-proposals, the review process is we'll review basic project features to identify questions, concerns. We'll do eligibility review and determination. And for any projects looking for the priority population benefit status, there'll be an initial review of that, an initial review of title, and initial readiness review. It's a tongue twister. And then at the application stage, we'll confirm the basic project features, review any updates since the pre-proposal was submitted. For projects that are claiming the priority population benefit status, we'll review and determine if those are if those do meet the requirements for priority population benefits. We'll do a full title review, a full readiness review, and then do the selection criteria evaluation. So with that, I will hand it over to Artemis to discuss the details of completing your pre-proposal.
Thank you. So this table shows a bit of the general information that you'll need to fill out in the pre-proposal, and we'll discuss the priority population status piece later on in the presentation. Next slide. Thank you. So the SALC acquisition amount should only be the cost for the easement or fee value being requested of this program. An official appraisal is not needed at this stage or with the application. However, justification of the easement value estimate will need to be provided at the application stage. If approved for funding, you can request up to 15%, up to a 15% increase with SGC's executive director approval. For associated costs, the Strategic Growth Council will award up to $60,000 in associated costs to all awarded projects unless the applicants request less in the project funding section of the application. Instead, if awarded, grantees will bill against the list of eligible costs provided in the grant agreement. This is something that changed over this last round. For anyone who applied round 7, it was $50,000, and this year we did increase it. So eligible associated costs include staff and subcontractor time, baseline reports, PTRs, one appraisal, and escrow and closing fees, and all other costs such as surveys, environmental site assessments, and mineral remoteness evaluations will be subject to department review and approval. Applicants are not required to provide a detailed budget with their application unless they're requesting more than the allocated $60,000. If you feel that your project will require more than $60,000 in associated costs, please discuss this with the grant manager. SGC has discretion to increase a project's associated cost allocation if it determines such costs are commensurate with the work needed to complete the project. In addition to this change in associated costs, the department will now accept invoices for associated costs on a monthly basis. We still require that costs be incurred within the grant term to be eligible for payment. And the only exception to this is appraisals, which will not be paid until after the easement is closed to ensure we are funding the appraisal that establishes the approved easement value. For management plans and carbon farm plans, you can request either, but you cannot request both. For match, if you have not applied yet, list those sources you anticipate applying to. And the estimated fee fair market value is needed for fee acquisitions only. SALC only pays 75% of the estimated easement value of a hypothetical easement placed on the property, unless the project qualifies for priority population status or is in one of the investment target categories. Applicants will need to provide match for the remainder. For investment targets, SALC will aim to award 20% of available funding for acquisition grants to fund projects that provide secure land tenure to a beginning or veteran farmer or rancher. A farmer or rancher who is a member of a federally recognized or non-federally recognized California Native American tribe on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission, or to a farmer or rancher that is a resident of a priority population or provides meaningful benefits to a priority population as defined in the guidelines. SALC will aim to award 5% of available funding for acquisition grants for a farmer or rancher who is a member of a federally recognized or non-federally recognized California Native American tribe on the contact list, is either the applicant or a co-applicant on the project. Other information I need to provide, restrictions on agriculture. So how those restrictions are consistent with properties continuing agricultural use and whether the restrictions would substantially impair agricultural use on the property. Project acreage, so tell us how many acres the project is, and you can break it down by prime, irrigated, non-irrigated, and non-agricultural acres. Applications will ask for prime, statewide importance, unique, and local importance. And for grazing projects, we will review soil quality against NRCS data for scoring purposes. For sale and subdivisions, projects that are not rejected, if a landowner is interested in reserving the right to sell parcels separately. However, this needs to be within reason, and we want to encourage estate planning while staying true to the program's purpose of avoiding conversion to residential or rural residential uses. Water and mineral rights. Applicants can submit projects with severed mineral rights, but will need to have a plan to resolve those rights in a way that minimizes risk to the ag operation. You can do this by either mineral remoteness evaluation, remerge rights, drill pads, and easement deed language that outlines processes for exercise of existing third-party rights. The SALC template allows for exercise of rights below 150 feet, but grantees can request stricter deed language, like complete prohibition if desired. Future single-family residences, the number can be 0. If it is 0, should be reasonable for the size of the property, contain commercial agricultural use and estate planning if the landowner desires. And DOC does not have a maximum size restriction. This is up to the applicant based on their policies, but should be consistent with the area and local zoning. And we cannot restrict secondary dwellings. So if the single family residence number is 0, then secondary dwellings would be 0. But if the single family residences is 1 or more, you must allow secondary dwellings consistent with California Government Code Section 65852.2. We also cannot prohibit farm worker housing in the easement, and restrictions cannot be stricter than California Health and Safety Code Section 17021.6. Building envelopes should be in the area where construction of buildings and accessory buildings can occur, and any other activities as negotiated in the easement. So you must list the size, number, and location of all existing building envelopes, if any, and then you must list the size and number of future building envelopes. If there are none existing, there should be at least 1 future building envelope to accommodate farm worker housing. So applicants do not have to identify the location of the future building envelope in the pre-proposal application or the easement. However, if they and the landowner choose not to identify the location at this time, they must agree to deed language that describes the process for that building envelope's identification in the event of construction of a single-family residence or farm worker housing, and submission of an application without a location identified will be considered acceptance of that term. Other reserved rights, this can include oil and gas sites, wind, solar, and communication towers. Be sure to discuss these rights in advance with the landowners. So for eligibility, required documents, nonprofit applicants and proposed interest holders must submit the following documentation: your IRS status as a charitable nonprofit, articles of incorporation, and adopted policies that detail the organization's goals and purposes, including the organization's commitment to conservation of agriculture, rangeland, and farmland. Government applicants and proposed interest holders should submit a copy of the relevant statute and other policies outlining their purpose and authority regarding the conservation of agricultural land, and tribes are exempt from this requirement. For capacity, applicants and proposed interest holders must provide proof of organizational capacity to acquire and steward conservation acquisitions for their agricultural conservation values as part of the pre-proposal. Applicants may meet this requirement by providing proof of LTA accreditation or providing copies of the following documents as relevant. So there's conflict of interest policy, easement amendment policy, monitoring policy, stewardship endowment policy, and easement enforcement policy. LTA accreditation and documents just noted are typically proof of capacity for nonprofit applicants. If you're unsure how to meet this requirement, please contact staff and we will assist you. Applicants and proposed interest holders that have submitted documentation of organizational eligibility and capacity through a previous application may certify that they meet those most current versions of the documents and are on file with the department in lieu of submitting the documents themselves. If you are unsure whether the department has the most recent versions on file, just please reach out to anybody on staff and we'll check and make sure. Also, a sample landowner letter of intent is online, and landowners and applicants will need to certify that they have discussed the easement value being proposed in the application. The letter of intent will also indicate that the easement is voluntary and not part of a local government's condition placed upon issuance of an entitlement for use. To support for infill and compact development will be evaluated separately from risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses. These are thresholds, criteria, and final determinations will be made at the eligibility stage. Staff will evaluate these factors on a project-by-project basis. So factors when considering evaluating these two criteria may include the likelihood of conversion to non-ag uses in the near future. And at this stage, we'll consider multiple conversion pressures. So projects at risk of conversion to residential or rural residential uses in the near future will be prioritized for funding. Whether the property acts or adds to a community separator or greenbelt, relevant land conversion, development trends in the region, including parcelization, changes in land use, housing development patterns, and increased housing costs, commute times to job centers, development rights associated with the developability of the property, including minimum zoning, ordinances, and regulations that may limit development, and landscape factors that may impede development. Whether existing and or planned transportation infrastructure promotes sprawl development in the region, and if there's access to broadband. Plus any additional relevant factors presented by the applicant. So if staff have questions, we will reach or we will request clarification prior to determinations made by or made at SALC's discretion. Applications may be deemed eligible with conditions, and any items identified in the feedback questions will need to be answered in the application to SALC satisfaction in order for the project to be considered for funding. Staff are available to discuss projects in advance of June 15th. And Shauna will go over an example project for infill and compact development.
Thanks, Artemis. So the list that Artemis went over is extensive. We don't anticipate you providing information on every single one of those items in your narrative. What we really want you to focus on are the items that you feel are relevant to justify the project's support for infill and compact development and justify the project's risk of conversion specific to your project. So I just want to put that out there. We will look at whatever factors you identify as relevant, and we may do cursory reviews of the others to see if those are relevant as well. But I just want to make that clear that we don't expect you to just throw the kitchen sink at us unless you want to, but would prefer not. Just pick those factors that you feel make the most sense to make the case for your project. So we're gonna, I want to walk through this two different for both items. So for projects that support infill and compact development, we'll look at these list of factors in one specific way, and then for whether or not the project is at risk of conversion, we'll look at the factors from that lens. So you should have on your screen right now an image of a potential project site. It's irrigated agricultural land, roughly between 2 and 5 miles from rural residential development, and as well as residential development. So when we're looking, so if we had this project and we were looking at whether or not this project supports infill and compact development, the things that we would be looking at are that we would potentially be looking for when we're assessing this is the project, would it potentially act as a community separator or greenbelt? Are there other communities that protecting this project would help to buffer development from? Are there other protected lands near this project site so that this project would contribute to creating a green belt? We would look at parcelization on the property, as well as in the region, and changes in land use that are happening in that area. We would look at housing patterns, all from the lens of, does it look like there is sprawl development or leapfrog development happening in the region and in the area where the project site is, so that if we're protecting this, we're really helping to, if we're protecting that project site, it would contribute to reducing that sprawl or that leapfrog development. We have multiple different tools we're potentially going to that we can use for this. We have our farmland mapping and monitoring maps, which over time give us a sense of where development is happening, where more recent development has happened, say up to 2018. We also have access to housing data that gives us a sense of what current housing development patterns look like in terms of housing applications and permits and things like that. So we'll be looking at that data as well, just to get a sense of where development is currently happening, both in regions near where the projects are being presented and throughout the state. From a supporting infill and compact development perspective, if we look at commute times to job centers, we would look at, would development of this project site result in longer commute times to relevant job centers? Is there access to public transportation, or would there be result in excess vehicle miles traveled along that commute? We would also look at development rights associated with the property and how developable the property is. And how developable the property is. So that is from the does the property support infill and compact development perspective. Then we will take those same questions and shift the lens to say, is the project at risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses? And you can advance the slide. It's the same slide, just risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses. And so, as Melinda said, or as Artemis said, at the pre-proposal stage, we will consider non-agricultural uses, a wide range of non-agricultural uses. This is a threshold criteria. So, are there large lot estate uses? Is it under threat of conversion to commercial or industrial uses? Is the property at risk of development because the landowner has received multiple offers to purchase the property from a developer? Those are the types of things that you can present as justification for whether or not the property is at risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses. At the application stage, once we're prioritizing projects and doing the selection evaluation, we will prioritize projects that are risk of conversion to residential or rural residential uses in the near term. So just keep that in mind in terms of which projects might score better at the application stage. In terms of rural residential development, for those who have applied to the program in the past, keep in mind that we are not using our risk options this round. And so the 1 to 10 acres is not a limit on rural residential development. So you may go beyond that 10 acres in terms of your justification of rural residential development. And whatever seems reasonable for the region that your project is located in. Examples of how we might use some of the questions that we asked previously to look at risk of conversion, commute times to job centers. We might ask, does the location of the property make that property a good candidate for conversion based on to local or regional job centers. In terms of development, we would look at developability of the property, including minimum zoning, ordinances or regulations that may limit development, the landscape factors that might impede development, such as slopes or location in a floodway. We would, in terms of developability, a project might have one legal parcel or two legal parcels at the existing minimum zoning with limited subdivision potential and not a lot of small zoned parcels in the area. It might have one house on it. We would consider that developability probably pretty low. A project with, say, one legal parcel and one house on it, but where the minimum zoning would allow subdivision to multiple lots, 5 or 10, just an example, it could be different. That might have slightly higher developability and might be at a little bit more risk of conversion. A project with multiple legal parcels with only one house on it and 0 reserved rights. And the ability to be subdivided further down into smaller lots might have higher developability. So those are the examples of the types of questions that we'll be looking at and walking through to determine whether or not a project meets both of those threshold criteria. And we might not have covered all of them in our list or in that presentation. And so that's why we give you the option, if there are factors unique to your project or your region, that you can provide justification for those in your narrative, and we'll consider those on a project by project basis. I will now hand it back to Artemis to move us through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks. So applicants must demonstrate that the project will result in a reduction in GHGs. SALC program funding is provided by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, otherwise known as the California Climate Investments. All projects funded by CCI must demonstrate that the project supports a sustainable community strategy, or if an SCS is unavailable, a regional plan that includes policies to reduce GHGs. So as mentioned previously, SALC is a component of, next slide, please, is a component of SGC's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which requires all projects funded thereunder support the implementation of a sustainable community strategy. If a strategy is unavailable for the region where your project is located, then projects must support a regional plan that includes policies to reduce GHGs. So an SCS is available for every region covered by a metropolitan planning organization. CARB maintains information regarding SCSs on its website at the link that Melinda just put in the chat. And she'll be dropping another link into the chat, which provides additional links to all documents related to each MPO's SCS. A list of MPOs in the counties they cover can be found by clicking regional agencies under the program links sidebar. And as mentioned, if your project is located within a non-MPO plan, you can still meet the eligibility criteria by demonstrating your project support for a regional plan that includes policies to reduce GHGs. If a tribe is the applicant, we will consider this criterion met if they have a tribal plan that demonstrates a commitment to reduce GHG emissions, such as an adopted air quality plan, and if they are a signatory to an international agreement to reduce GHGs, or if they are signatory to an agreement with other tribal authorities demonstrating a commitment to reduce GHG emissions. Next slide. The parcels of the easement must be within an area that has a market, infrastructure, and support services to maintain commercial agricultural production. In order to be eligible for funding, the proposed easement must be large enough to sustain commercial agricultural production and is expected to continue to be used for agricultural use in the future. For tribes, gathering and activities that promote healthy trees, shrubs, and perennial forbs for the cultivation of traditional foods, herbal medicine, fibers, and dyes will be considered to meet this criteria. For a full definition of agricultural uses, you can refer to the glossary of the guidelines, Appendix K. And priority population. So SALC will provide up to 100% funding for projects that are located within a priority population area and provides benefits to the priority population. If you'd like, if you're planning on submitting for priority population benefits, you can use the thumbs up feature in the reactions just so we can get an idea. And if you need help, just reach out to anybody on the SALC staff and we can see if we can help you with whatever documents that you need to submit before the June 15th deadline. Projects that don't qualify for priority population status, but are led by tribes or provide secure land tenure to a member of a priority population or to a beginning or veteran farmer rancher will be prioritized for funding and may receive 100% funding for eligible costs. Applicants interested in being considered for population status must complete the checklist, which Melinda just put in the chat, thank you, and provide supporting documentation for the claim in the application. These materials will be evaluated in detail to determine if the benefits provided rise to a level that can be claimed to meet AB 1550 requirements. Information provided to support a priority population benefits claim will be reviewed by the SALC interagency committee and with final concurrence determined by CARB. So if you're interested in exploring population status or if the project may provide secure land tenure to a member of a priority population, we do encourage you to reach out to us for technical assistance prior to June 15th to help with the evaluation. If you're unable to ask us for technical assistance prior to the deadline, we still highly encourage you to submit the checklist and any supporting documentation that you have with the pre-proposal so the grant manager can provide feedback prior to the application. And I will now hand it back to Melinda.
Thanks, Artemis. So just a few more required items for the pre-proposal, and those include, first of all, that all applicants must provide a preliminary title report that's less than 12 months old. And then that title report should also include all the correct parcels proposed for the conservation easement and also include the underlying documents. So if you don't think you're able to provide a preliminary title report with those underlying documents by the pre-proposal deadline, please be in touch with SALC staff to discuss. We may potentially delay this requirement at our discretion. The applicant should also provide a map of the easement property structure, including the easement boundaries and the total acreage. And the applicant is also expected to define any reserve rights, including but not limited to the building envelope, single family residence, and so forth that were discussed a little bit earlier that Artemis reviewed. The project structure and reserve rights should also be based off of conversations between the applicant and the landowner. The inclusion of all the items above will assist the department staff in providing feedback and determining the project's overall readiness. All projects awarded funding are also eligible to receive up to $10,000 in additional funding toward the acquisition and associated costs for an adaptive management plan. And there is information on our website in regards to what that plan should look like, but it must be incorporated by reference in the deed. It will be prescribed sustainable practices for the protection of air, water, and soil resources on the property. It needs to be approved by the department and updated every 10 years. Additional requirements must meet the minimum requirements located in Appendix L of the SALC guidelines. The plan must be approved by the department and signed. This is the management plan continued. Sorry about that. And must be approved by the department, signed by the grantee and the landowner prior to execution of the deed, and release the $10,000 allocated for the plan. Now, the plan must be developed by a qualified planner or resource conservation district. And you can reach out to us if you have any questions about that. But generally, it means someone who's taken training through NRCS to become a conservation planner or certified as a crop advisor, certified grazing land professional, those kinds of things. RCD collaboration as well. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that. If there are any changes that have the potential to significantly impact the conservation purpose, the management plan must be updated. And the grantee must report the landowner's management plan's implementation and any changes in the agricultural operation or ownership from the previous year on its monitoring report. As mentioned earlier, there's a few key dates and deadlines to keep in mind. June 15th, acquisition, the pre-proposals are due, and again, those are mandatory. July 1st will be the planning pre-proposals are due. August 8th, the capacity applications are due. And then September 9th, the applications are due for acquisition and planning. And again, mid-December, awards will be recommended for approval by the Strategic Growth Council, and then looking for March for getting those grantees entered into, and that says 22, doesn't it? Yeah, it should be March 23, entered in a grant agreement with DOC. And with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. I'm sorry we ran a little bit longer than we had hoped to, but we'd certainly like to open it up for any questions that you might have, if you have any that you want to pop into the chat. I know that was probably a million miles an hour and a lot of information all at once. So, you know, you're also, we really encourage folks to reach out to us if they have any questions, if they want some technical assistance in thinking through some of their projects and wondering if it's, you know, is this a good project? You know, we're happy to have those discussions with you. That's what we're here for. So, you know, if you have some concerns about your project or some questions, it's better to ask us and have some technical assistance before completing a full, you know, if you're debating whether or not to do the proposal, feel free to reach out to us.
Melinda, would you mind going one slide back so everyone can copy our email if they don't already have it?
You've got it. And our website, a lot of information is on our website. Again, all the guidelines are linked there as well, and some of the documents that we referred to. So there's quite a bit there. So Isabel is asking, can you please provide a definition of farm labor residence? And Shauna, I'm not sure, I don't think we have that specifically in the glossary, but I can check. Thoughts about how that would be defined.
We don't have it specifically in the glossary, but it's a unit that is primarily used as a residence for a person who works on the farm or ranch that the project is for.
Great, thanks. And Kathleen is asked, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I said I corrected myself to one or more persons.
Gotcha, okay. And then Kathleen is asking, can you confirm percentage of matching fund requirements for the fee title ag lands acquired for tribal partners?
Yeah, so they're eligible for, so it's 100% of eligible costs, and we will fund up to, so it would be up to 100% of the easement value, a hypothetical easement value for the property, and then the remainder of the fee acquisition value would need to be from another source.
Another source, gotcha. Does that answer your question, Kathleen? I think it does. Yep.
I know that's not ideal, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. And then Jake is asking, how does the grant application funding process integrate with CEQA that may be required for the construction of a structure?
So we don't fund construction of structures. So that would be completely separate from anything that we would be involved with.
Perfect. Great. Any other burning questions? And again, if you haven't had a chance to fill out the poll, it would be really great if you could. Isabella, thank you for answering. Just to clarify, the farm residence needs to house the farmer on site or farm worker. Could be a farm worker. Yeah, farmer, farm worker. Is that correct, Shauna? It'd have to be the person actually working the farm or the ranch.
Well, so I guess I'm not quite, I might be, I want to make sure I'm understanding the question or understanding the question correctly and that you're understanding what our requirement is. You are not, the property itself is not required to have farm worker housing on it at the time that the property is conserved or proposed for conservation. But you have to, in the easement deed, allow for the option to construct farm worker housing if the landowner so chooses to do so in the future. And that allowance needs to be on site, yes. So
Great,
say a 1 acre building envelope for future farm worker housing.
Gotcha. Does that answer your question, Isabel?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And I just popped the link in for the poll again, if you, and I can send that around when I send the other stuff, but we really appreciate you filling that out just so we have some kind of general sense of how many folks. Can another farm worker live there, a worker that doesn't work on that site?
We don't specify that.
So potentially.
Generally, the goal of this requirement is to ensure that there is farm worker housing available near where it is needed.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you all for joining us. I know that was a lot of information and, you know, there's a lot involved in these pre-proposals, so really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks, Julie. Jake is asking, did I hear correctly that, whoops, it keeps moving. Did I hear correctly that new farmer ranchers are eligible for additional funding?
Yes, if the property is farmed or leased by a new farmer or a rancher, then the project could be eligible for 100% funding.
Perfect. Thanks, Shauna. And that is new this round, so. Thank you all very much. We'll be here for another, you know, if you have a couple of questions, feel free to stay on. Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and stop the recording. And you guys can go out for a walk and enjoy the sunshine if you have it where you are.